My daughter called me at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. Not my son-in-law. My daughter. That detail mattered, though I wouldn't understand why until much later. Dad. Her voice was strange, flat, but with something underneath it, like a wire pulled too tight. Don't use your credit card tomorrow. Don't make any calls from the house phone. And whatever you do, don't sign anything Victor puts in front of you. Sweetheart, it's 2 o'clock. I know what time it is. Are you listening to me? I was sitting up in bed by then, feet on the cold hardwood floor of my bedroom in Harrisburg. 68 years old, and my heart was hammering like I was 25 again, back when I drove long-haul trucks through mountain passes in February. I'm listening. Good. Keep the doors locked. I'll be there by morning. She hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time after that, listening to the house settle around me. It was old colonial, built in 1962, and it had a particular language at night. The creak of the hallway floor near the linen closet. The rattle of the kitchen window when the wind came from the north. I knew every sound. I'd lived there for 31 years, since my wife Linda and I moved in when our youngest was still in diapers. Linda had been gone for 4 years, and ever since the sounds of that house had felt different. Lonelier? Like the house itself was grieving alongside me. My son-in-law Victor had moved in 9 months ago. It started the way these things always do, reasonably. My daughter Amanda was between jobs after her marketing firm downsized. Victor had recently left his position at a property management company, something about a dispute with a partner he never wanted to discuss in detail. They were behind on their apartment lease in Lancaster. Just a few months, Amanda said. Just until they got back on their feet. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. Victor was 41, 15 years younger than Amanda, with the kind of easy confidence that reads as charm until you spend enough time around it to see the machinery underneath. He was always helpful at first. Fixed the gutters. Drove me to my cardiologist appointments when my driving made me nervous after the mild episode I'd had the previous spring. Cooked dinner twice a week. Big, elaborate meals that made the house smell like something lived in again. I told my son Trevor about the arrangement over the phone. Trevor was 43 and lived in Denver, worked as a fraud investigator for a financial services firm. He'd been skeptical of Victor since the wedding, though he'd never said anything specific, just a quiet reserve whenever Victor's name came up in conversation. How long are they planning to stay? Trevor asked. A few months, until they land on their feet. He didn't say anything for a moment. You sure about this, Dad? She's my daughter, Trev. I know she is. The first few months were genuinely fine. Amanda helped with the garden. Victor handled the recycling in the yard. I still drove myself most places and paid my own bills, and if the house felt a little crowded sometimes, that was a fair price for the company. Then, gradually, things started shifting. It was small things at first. Victor started answering the door when visitors came. Then he started answering my cell phone when I left it in another room, just checking if it was important. Amanda started coming with me to my doctor's appointments, which I appreciated, until I noticed she was asking the questions, and I was sitting quietly, and somehow I wasn't sure how that had happened. My neighbor Pete stopped coming by for coffee. When I asked him about it, he looked uncomfortable. Said Victor had mentioned I wasn't feeling up to company on the days Pete typically came. I hadn't said anything like that to Victor. When I brought it up at dinner, Victor nodded seriously and said he'd just been trying to protect my rest. Didn't I tire easily these days? Hadn't I said I was overwhelmed? I had said something like that once, after a bad week. He was good. That was the thing I kept coming back to later. He was very, very good. By month 6, I had the vague, unsettling sense that I was a guest in my own home. Victor had converted the spare room into an office. Amanda had organized my files to help, she said, and I noticed afterward that my insurance documents, my investment statements, my property deed were all in a filing cabinet in their room now. For safekeeping, she explained. I asked for them back. She said she'd get them. She never did. My brother Al called from Phoenix one Sunday. He and I talked most Sundays, same as we had since we were kids. After we hung up, Victor mentioned, almost casually, that Al had seemed to call a lot. Was everything okay between us? Did Al have a tendency to stir things up? He'd noticed I sometimes seemed stressed after those calls. Al had been my best friend my entire life. I started letting the calls go to voicemail. Looking back, I can see the shape of it clearly. At the time, I only felt this low-level unease, like static on a radio, never quite loud enough to identify. I was 68 and I'd had a cardiac episode, and I lived alone, and maybe I did need more help than I wanted to admit. That was the story I kept telling myself. They meant well. I was being stubborn. The Thursday night, everything changed. I had gone to bed early with a headache. I woke up around 11 and lay still for a few minutes, the way you do when you're trying to decide if you're actually awake. The house was quiet. Then I heard voices downstairs. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I got up to get a glass of water, but the voices carried up the staircase and I stopped on the landing without meaning to. Victor's voice, low and certain. The cognitive evaluation is the key. If we can get a formal assessment that shows reduced capacity, the guardianship petition becomes straightforward. A pause. Amanda. But he's not. He's fine, Victor. His doctors haven't said anything. Doctors cover themselves. They note everything. That episode last spring is in his records. Combine that with some documentation of confusion, difficulty managing finances, which we can establish, and the assessment becomes a formality. Silence. And then the house? Amanda asked. Once we have guardianship, we manage his assets. The property would be transferred to a trust we control. He'd still live here. It's not like we're putting him out. A longer silence. Then Amanda said, quieter, he worked 30 years for that house. And now he's old and alone and it's depreciating because he won't maintain it properly. We'd be doing him a favor. I stood on that landing for I don't know how long. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest that I tried not to pay attention to. Then I went back to my room, very quietly, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. I did not sleep. In the morning I acted completely normal. Made coffee. Asked Victor if he wanted eggs. Made small talk about the weather. He poured himself a cup and smiled at me with those easy eyes, and I smiled back, and inside I was thinking clearly and carefully, the way I used to think through a long route in bad weather. I need to figure out what I'm dealing with before I move. That afternoon, when they both gone out, I went to the filing cabinet in their room. It was locked. I found the key on the third try on top of the doorframe, the way Linda used to hide things, and spent 2 hours going through everything. My investment accounts were intact. The property deed was in my name only. So far, nothing had been changed. But tucked in the back of the cabinet was a folder I didn't recognize. Inside was a printed email exchange between Victor and someone named Barry Feld, a paralegal at a firm in Philadelphia. The emails discussed a guardianship filing, timelines, what documentation would be needed. There was a reference to cognitive evaluation scheduling, and a note about a physician contact who could provide supportive assessment. I photographed everything with my phone. Then I relocked the cabinet, put the key back, and called my daughter. Not Amanda, Trevor. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything in about 10 minutes, keeping my voice low and steady. When I finished, there was a silence. Dad. His voice had changed. Professional. Careful. Don't move anything. Don't let them know you've seen this. Can you get out of the house tomorrow for a few hours without it seeming strange? I have a dentist appointment. Go to the dentist, then go see an attorney. Not anyone Victor has mentioned or could know about. Find someone independently. He paused. I'm going to start looking into Barry Feld. What are you looking for? I don't know yet, but if Victor was willing to do this to you, there's probably a reason it wasn't his first time thinking about it. The attorney's name was Marion Schultz. Her office was on State Street, 3rd floor, with a window that overlooked a parking garage. She was 60 herself, silver-haired, unhurried. I sat across from her and laid out everything I had, the photographed emails, the timeline of what had been happening in the house, the conversation I'd heard on the landing. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, the guardianship scheme is real and it's workable, at least on paper. They'd need a formal cognitive evaluation and 2 physician statements. The good news is that process takes time and requires your cooperation at some point. They can't file it without eventually needing you to appear. She looked at me directly. But here's what concerns me more. Who is Victor Harlan, actually? I didn't have a good answer. Trevor got me one. 2 weeks later, he called me on my cell from a number I didn't recognize. Use this number from now on. The call I'm about to tell you about, don't discuss it in the house. Go sit in your car in the driveway. I did. It was a cold November evening, and I sat with the engine running and the heat on, and Trevor told me what he'd found. Victor Harlan had done this before. Not guardianship specifically, but financial exploitation of an older partner. A woman in her 70s in Wilmington, Delaware, had filed a civil suit against him 5 years prior. She'd been a widow he'd moved in with, and over 18 months he'd maneuvered control of 2 investment accounts, totaling nearly $300,000 before the woman's nephew, a paralegal, caught on. The case is settled out of court. Victor had changed his name from Victor Hartley to Victor Harlan sometime after. He'd met Amanda 8 months after the settlement. Does Amanda know? I asked. Trevor was quiet for a moment. I don't know, Dad. I genuinely don't know. That question lived with me for the next 3 weeks, while Marion Schultz built out my legal position, and I quietly moved the bulk of my liquid savings to a new account Amanda and Victor didn't know about. Marion had advised me to alert my investment broker to freeze any transfer requests that came from anyone other than me directly. I did that on a Tuesday while Victor was running errands. I changed my online banking passwords from a computer at the Harrisburg Public Library. I added Marion's number to my phone under a fake name. I did all of this while making dinner and watching the evening news and asking Victor how his job search was going, and he'd smile at me across the kitchen table and tell me he had some promising leads. The hardest part wasn't the logistics. The hardest part was sitting across from my daughter at breakfast and not knowing what she knew. Amanda looked tired those weeks. Quieter than usual. Sometimes she'd look at me in a way that I couldn't read. Not Victor's calculated warmth, but something more complicated, more ashamed. I wanted to ask her. I couldn't. Not yet. Marion was ready in early December. She filed a preemptive motion with the court establishing my legal competency, supported by statements from my cardiologist, my dentist, and Pete, my neighbor, who was more than willing to explain who had been blocking his visits. She also filed for a temporary restraining order barring any guardianship petition without prior court notification, and she sent a formal letter to Barry Feld's firm, which had the effect of immediately ending that relationship. Trevor, meanwhile, had passed what he'd found about Victor's past to a contact in civil litigation in Delaware, who reopened the inquiry into the Wilmington settlement. Apparently there were questions about whether certain documents had been fully disclosed during the original proceedings. The night Marion filed, I sat in my workshop. I'd kept a corner of the garage for woodworking since I retired, an old hobby I'd neglected, and I sanded a piece of walnut I'd been putting off for months. Just sanded it back and forth until my arms ached. It helped. Amanda came to find me there around 9 o'clock. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me. Then she said, "Dad, can we talk?" Sure. I kept sanding. Alone, without Victor. I set down the sandpaper and looked at her. Whatever I'd expected to see, it wasn't this. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She was holding her own elbows the way she used to when she was 12, and had done something she was ashamed of. He told me it was just financial planning, she said. That's what he called it, getting ahead of potential issues. He said you'd thank us eventually. And the emails with the paralegal? She looked at me. You saw those. 9 months ago, I drove a truck route from Pittsburgh to Chicago in a blizzard. I may be old. I'm not stupid. She sat down on an overturned bucket and pressed her hands together between her knees. I didn't know about the woman in Delaware. I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know about that. When Trevor called me last week. Trevor called you? 3 days ago. She looked at the floor. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since then. We were quiet for a long moment. A car went by on the street outside. Did you laugh about it? I asked. Taking the house, the money. Did you think it was funny? She looked up sharply. No, God, no. I was scared of him by the end. I was scared of what would happen if I told him I wanted to stop. Her voice dropped. I'm still scared. I thought about that, about the difference between scared and complicit, about whether that difference was enough. "You need to leave," I said finally. "Not this house. Him." She nodded. She was crying now, quietly. "I know. And Amanda, whatever happens legally, Marion is filing things that are going to involve you in some capacity. You need your own attorney." "I know that too." I handed her a piece of sandpaper, more as something to do with her hands than anything else. She held it without using it. "I still love you," I said. "You understand that. But love isn't a pass, not for this." "I know, Dad." Victor left the house 4 days later, when Marion had his attorney served with the civil complaint. His departure was quieter than I expected. He packed 2 bags and was gone in under an hour. He didn't say anything to me directly. He looked at me once from the front hallway, and in that look I could see him recalculating, reassessing, moving on. He was already thinking about the next situation. I was already old news. Amanda filed for divorce in January. She moved into a small apartment in Camp Hill, 10 minutes from my house. We talked on the phone most days, short conversations about ordinary things, and once a week she came for dinner. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We talked about the grandchildren she was hoping to have someday, about the job she'd found at a nonprofit, about whether I should finally renovate the kitchen the way Linda had always wanted. The civil case moved slowly, the way those things do. Victor's attorney attempted a settlement twice. Marion declined both times. The Delaware inquiry had found enough to support a new civil filing there as well. Barry Feld's firm cut ties with Victor and issued a statement distancing themselves from the guardianship work. In March, I got a call from a woman named Sandra Kowalski. She was 73 and lived in suburban Philadelphia. Her late husband's estate had been partially managed by a property trust company Victor had operated under a different LLC. She'd lost $60,000 before her accountant flagged the transfers. She had found my name through court records. She wanted to know if I would be willing to speak with her attorney. I would. By spring, there were 4 of us. Different situations, different amounts, but the same pattern, the same operational method. Charm, isolation, control of documents, then financial transfer through just plausible enough mechanisms. Victor's attorney was no longer talking settlement. The hearing was held on a Thursday in April. Victor sat on the other side of the courtroom looking diminished in a way I hadn't expected, smaller without the context of other people's homes and other people's lives to inhabit. His attorney argued for reduced liability. Marion presented 11 months of documented evidence, emails, financial records, my neighbor Pete's testimony, the Delaware case history, and the recorded conversation I'd had with Sandra Kowalski, which her attorney had preserved properly for evidentiary purposes. The judge, a small, precise woman named Judge Carey, reviewed everything over 2 days. On the 3rd day, she entered judgment. Victor was ordered to pay restitution to all 4 plaintiffs. My portion, $94,000, representing legal fees, documented financial exploitation, and emotional distress. He would pay in structured installments over 7 years. Given the Delaware findings and the pattern of behavior, he was also referred to the State Attorney General's office for potential criminal referral. Amanda was not named as a defendant. Marion had worked carefully to establish the distinction between her limited involvement and Victor's orchestration. It wasn't a clean distinction, but the court accepted it. I sat in the parking lot afterward for a long time. Marion came and found me there, concerned. "You okay?" "I'm not sure what I am." She sat on the hood of her car next to mine. "That's a reasonable response." "I keep thinking about Linda," I said. "She would have hated that I needed 9 months to figure out what was happening." "Your wife sounds like she was very sharp." "She was the sharpest person I ever knew." I looked at the parking garage wall in front of us. "She'd also tell me I'm spending too much time sitting in parking lots." Marion laughed. It was a good laugh, probably sound advice. I drove home. The house was quiet. I went out to the garage and stood at my workbench for a while, not doing anything specific, just standing there with my hands on the wood. Amanda came by that evening with takeout from the Thai place I liked. We ate at the kitchen table, the way we had when she was in high school, and it was just the 2 of us after Linda worked late. She'd set the table properly with the cloth napkins, something she'd always done even as a kid. We didn't talk about the verdict. We talked about her new job, about a garden bed I wanted to put in along the south fence, about whether I should finally get a new water heater. Normal things. The kind of things that make a life. After she left, I went back out to the garage. I'd been working on a small bookshelf for the past 3 weeks. Solid oak, simple design, nothing complicated. I got back to it now, fitting the joints, testing the fit. There was something satisfying about wood. It told you exactly where you'd gone wrong. No ambiguity. The joint either fit or it didn't, and if it didn't, you worked it until it did. I'd spent 30 years driving 18-wheelers through every kind of weather this country had to offer. Mountain passes in Wyoming in January, coastal highways in hurricane season, night routes through fog so thick you were driving by memory and instrument. You survived that by paying attention, by reading conditions, by not pretending things were fine when they weren't. I should have read the conditions sooner. That was on me. But I'd read them eventually, and I'd handled it. The bookshelf came together just right around midnight. I stood back and looked at it. Good lines. Solid. It would hold. I turned off the garage light and went inside and locked the door behind me. Trevor called the next morning, early, the way he did when he knew I'd be up. "How are you feeling?" Like a man who slept 8 hours for the first time in 6 months. He laughed, the same laugh he'd had since he was a boy, short and genuine. "Good. That's good, Dad." We talked for 45 minutes about nothing in particular. His kids, a trip he was planning, a documentary he'd watched about long-haul trucking that he thought I'd like. Easy conversation. The kind that doesn't need to carry anything except itself. Months pass the way they do when things are quiet and ordinary again. I renovated the kitchen, finally, with a contractor Linda's sister recommended. Light maple cabinets, new appliances, a window over the sink that actually opened properly for the first time in 15 years. The house felt different after. Not younger exactly, but like it had exhaled. Sandra Kowalski and I had lunch a few times. She was funny and direct, and had opinions about everything, which I appreciated. We weren't anything except two people who'd been through something similar and found it useful to talk to someone who understood it without explanation. Amanda's divorce was finalized in September. She called me from the courthouse parking lot after, and I could hear the particular quality of a weightlifting in her voice, that specific lightness. She had a second job interview the following week at a public relations firm in Harrisburg. She got it. She called me about that from a parking lot, too. I started volunteering on Tuesday evenings at a local workshop program for adults, learning basic carpentry skills, a city program, mostly younger people who'd never had someone show them how to measure twice, cut once. I taught them the things my own father had taught me on Saturday mornings in a garage that smelled like sawdust and motor oil. The continuity of it meant something I couldn't quite name. One Tuesday, a man about 40 came into the workshop late, apologetic, his first session. He sat across from me at the bench and watched how I held the chisel, and then picked one up and tried to copy the grip, getting it almost right on the first attempt. "You've worked with wood before," I said. "My grandfather's shop, long time ago." He turned the chisel over in his hands. "He passed last year." "I'm sorry." He was 91. He was still in the shop 3 weeks before he died. He looked up, and there was something in his face that I recognized. That particular combination of loss and gratitude that doesn't have a cleaner word. He used to say the work was the thing, not what you made, but the doing of it. I thought about that for the rest of the evening, driving home on familiar streets through familiar neighborhoods, past the diner where Linda and I had eaten breakfast every Saturday for 20 years, past the park where Amanda had learned to ride a bike, past the lot where my old trucking company used to be, now a self-storage facility. The work was the thing. I'd spent 68 years working, hauling freight, raising children, fixing a marriage that needed fixing, grieving one that ended before I was ready, building furniture in a garage at midnight because the wood told you the truth and that was worth something. Victor sat somewhere with a repayment schedule and a record that would follow him. Amanda sat in a new apartment building, a new life. one careful choice at a time. Trevor called every Sunday. Sandra and I had lunch plans for the first Thursday of next month. The house held. The bookshelf held. The kitchen let in light through a window that finally opened. I locked the garage and went inside and made coffee and sat at the table where Linda's napkins were still in the drawer, where my daughter had set the table with them just last week, and I thought, this is still mine. All of it. Still mine. That's not a small thing. At 68, that's everything. The folder was sitting right there in a locked cabinet I'd been walking past for months. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't hide in dramatic places. It hides in plain sight, inside ordinary routines, wrapped in the language of care. I think about Victor sometimes. Not with anger anymore, mostly with a kind of cold clarity. He wasn't stupid. He was actually very skilled at reading people, at finding the specific soft spot. In my case, loneliness after Linda died, the fear of becoming a burden, the guilt of needing help. He knew exactly which door to walk through. What he miscalculated was that being grieving and being foolish aren't the same thing. I had 30 years of driving through weather that wanted to kill me. I knew how to stay on the road when conditions turned. That's what I keep coming back to when I think about how this whole thing unfolded. The outcome wasn't luck. It followed from choices. His, Amanda's, mine. Victor chose a path built on dishonesty, and that path had a destination regardless of how long it took to arrive. Amanda made choices she's still reckoning with. And the reckoning is real and ongoing, and that's the only version of accountability that means anything. And I, eventually, not as fast as I should have, chose to trust what I was seeing over what I wanted to believe. That last part is the one I sit with. The honest version of wisdom isn't knowing things quickly. It's being willing to look clearly once you finally look. I should have looked sooner. I know that. But I looked, and then I acted, and that sequence matters. What I want to say to anyone in a situation like mine, anyone who's older and feels the edges of their independence being quietly managed away, is this. Your instincts are not symptoms. Feeling like something is wrong in your own home is not confusion. It is information. The world will sometimes try to convince you that age has made you unreliable, that your discomfort is a medical issue, rather than a reasonable response to an actual situation. Don't accept that framing without a fight. Trevor did what he did because he's decent, not because the system worked, or because someone intervened from outside. Because one person with integrity decided to pay attention and do something difficult. That's how most good outcomes actually happen. Not through institutions, but through individual people choosing honesty over convenience. Amanda is building something real now. I watch her make careful choices, one at a time, and I think about what it takes to rebuild your own sense of yourself after you've done something you're ashamed of. That takes a specific kind of strength. Not the loud kind, but the kind that shows up quietly every day and does the work anyway. I respect it. I'm still learning to trust it. Both things are true. The bookshelf I finished that night is in my living room. I look at it sometimes when I'm having coffee in the morning. Oak holds. If you cut it right and join it properly, it holds for a long time. That's not a metaphor I planned. It's just what's true. This is still my house, my life, my call. At 68, that's not a small thing. That's the whole thing.